again, everybody. This is Doc with Thoroughfan, and of course, last week we covered kind of what happened on day one of the 47th Annual Global Symposium on Racing put on by the Racetrack Industry Program of the University of Arizona out in Tucson, Arizona. Happened a little earlier this month in December, and so now we are going to kind of focus on what happened in day two, as there still was a lot of interesting discussion to be had, a lot of interesting topics to cover. So let's get right to it as we cover what happened in day two and the final day of the Global Symposium on Racing. So as we got started on day two of the symposium, we saw some great short presentations by senior students that are part of the Racetrack Industry Program, and four of them came up and gave what they called their capstone project presentations, and each one kind of focused on a different area of the sport. And there were a couple that certainly popped out in my mind, one of which was a student who had looked at exactly what the best makeup of a state racing commission should look like. And there was some really interesting data that she got from doing some survey questions and interviews of the executive directors of those racing commissions and things like that. So we are going to try to reach out to all of the students that presented here at Thoroughfan to see if they can either do a little bit of a further follow-up on what their projects were, maybe in a video format or at least in a written format for our newsletter. So certainly the one on racing commissions was interesting. There was another student who talked about getting the youth more involved in all aspects of racing through an education program designed for junior high and high school students. Another student talked about making jump racing safer. There was some interesting ideas that she put forth there. And another student focused on aftercare and especially traceability of horses that go through various aftercare facilities or through various sales auctions, whatever have you, after their racing careers are over. So all four were really interesting and certainly thought-provoking as far as those things go. And again, these students, they are the future potential leaders of the sport. So we definitely do want to give them as much of a platform to learn and also to advance in the industry, because they have now the education behind them. Hopefully through internships they'll be getting some good education as well. So kudos to them. And like I said, here at Thoroughfan, we're going to try to reach out to them and see if they can give us a little more information on the projects that they are working on. After that, really kind of, there were two main focuses of day two, and the first one was kind of focused on fixed odds and the sports betting wave. And the fixed odds debate, it goes back and forth. They had some companies that do fixed odds wagering in Australia talk about how their programs work, about how the different laws are going to be in place. Obviously each state has to pass kind of its own law as far as how fixed odds wagering will work. And of course, fixed odds, you're basically betting against the house as compared to pari-mutuel, where you're betting basically against everybody else that's betting in that race. The pros, obviously, of fixed odds wagering is you get a price locked in, so you know what your odds are going to be, which certainly should make those that cringe whenever you see the odds change mid-race or right before a race, after you may have bet a horse at a higher price and then right after the gates open it drops down to a much lower price. Obviously, you only get the price that happens at final odds. They also think that it may appeal to a different kind of demographic who are used to sports betting and fixed odds kind of in sports betting. They might try, come over to the racing side as well. The cons of it are we really don't know how many people are truly going to embrace fixed odds wagering in racing. There's some that think it won't be the panacea that we all think it will be. There's still a lot of questions about it, and one of the biggest questions that was brought up, especially to the panel that was there talking about fixed odds, was when you're betting against the house or you're betting with a bookmaker, basically the bookmaker can decide whether or not they want to take that bet. And this is a very general overview that I'm kind of saying here. I still don't completely understand all of it, but this is my understanding of it. Where they can, you say I want this price, the bookmaker will say okay, and you place your bet, which means that if you have a really savvy handicapper who's trying to beat the house, the bookmaker, after a while, if they make a big score, if the handicapper makes a big score, they may be able to come back and basically shut that handicapper out and say, no, we're not going to take bets from you anymore, because it would put the bookie or a bookmaker in a losing situation. So really, if you think about it, and the way they kind of explained it a little bit, is you almost really want the uneducated in a lot of ways when it comes to handicapping, betting these bookies or bookmaker places, because that's going to add enough money that the bookmaker is going to make a profit. And so whereas in parimutuel, really, a track cannot refuse a bet from a person, at least for that reason. I mean, there's other reasons they probably could, but if you have the money and you want to put it down, you're obviously putting it into the pool, and it's all getting put in with the regular parimutuel pool. So that was a very interesting area. The panel didn't so much really have an answer for that, I would say. They did talk about how they are trying to get certain rules passed, or try to get certain bookmakers to agree that they would take at least a minimum bet from a handicapper every time, and there would be no cutoff or anything. But stay tuned for that. There's probably obviously going to be a lot more talked about there. There was a lot of talk too about exactly how much money, when you go to fixed odds wagering, goes back to the track, and potentially the horsemen and the purses accounts and things like that, and some of that stuff has to be worked out. So it looks like New Jersey is going to be the first place to offer fixed odds wagering. If you remember, New Jersey was also the first place to offer exchange wagering, which I'll be honest, I still don't understand. And fixed odds wagering is a lot easier to understand than exchange wagering. But exchange wagering, that never really took off in New Jersey like we thought it, or like the people who were promoting it thought it would. So I think there's people that are still being very cautious, wondering if fixed odds is going to be, again, the panacea or the great hope for infusing a lot more money into the game that they're looking at. So that's going to be very interesting to see. Moving on to another panel discussion, sort of tied into the same thing. They talked more about the sports betting landscape, and really, once that Supreme Court ruling came down and states were basically allowed to offer sports betting, wow, has that industry just exploded. And just the amount of money they're taking in bets, just how that industry is exponentially expanding is just amazing. And obviously, sports betting will be coming to New York very soon, which will be a huge market. It's already available in a bunch of other states. And so really the people that were kind of behind the sports betting talks talked more about how to bring racing fans into kind of the sports betting world, and then also bringing all the sports betting folks into the racing world. And really what a lot of that focused on was getting what they call wallet. So basically a person who opens an account with a sports betting platform can have the ability to bet both parimutually on racing and also on sports betting, which right now in the way things are constructed, you may not be able to do. You may actually have to open two separate accounts. So they are working on kind of changing the rules so all of that can be brought into one wagering wallet per se that the bettor would use. The other big thing that they talked about to try to bring more interest from the regular sports fan into racing was what they talk about with parlay bets, where basically, and those that do sports betting know that you can bet, this team to win, and then, this team also has to win, and then maybe this team has to lose or whatever. And all three of those things have to happen for you to cash out. Well, what they're talking about now is trying to bring racing into that. So say like you have to pick the winner of a hockey game along with the winner of a football game, and then along with the winner of a major stakes race, say a Churchill Downs or something like that. So that brings the racing element into it, and they're working on trying to do that as well. So that was kind of the main focus of how some of these companies are really trying to cater things to more the racing fan, and also make things easy to understand for the regular sports bettor to kind of transfer over into betting more on racing. One thing that really wasn't addressed too much by these guys was the data question, and this comes up a lot, especially with handicappers and those that follow the game, where a lot of sports betting data is free for everybody to get at. But as far as racing data, handicapping past performances, usually you have to pay for those, especially if you want more detailed data. You definitely have to pay for it, which doesn't happen in the regular sports world in most cases. So that was a question that I was kind of surprised wasn't addressed or wasn't really asked by anybody in the audience or of any of the panel members. So we'll see where that goes too. If some of these sports betting companies now are going to see if they're going to offer free data in certain cases to help the fans out to better understand the game as far as that goes. So that was kind of what was talked about with the sports betting and the fixed odds area. The other real big talk that happened on the day 2 of the symposium was what's known as the decoupling debate. And for those that are kind of unaware, I'll try to make it really easy to understand, hopefully quickly. Basically, when casinos first got themselves into certain states that normally did not allow casino gambling, they kind of hooked themselves along with racetracks, because racetracks already had the infrastructure in place basically to allow these casinos to kind of open up, in an area that was already conducting gambling and things like that. So the common term is racinos. Now, in order to do that, what the racetrack says, well, if you're going to bring in all this whole new gambling aspect of things to us, or to the public, you're going to be taking away from money that we normally get from wagering. So we've got to be compensated somehow duly for that loss. And of course, this raises a whole bunch of debates that are for another talk, basically. But the casinos agreed, and basically so the two were coupled together. So what's happening now in a lot of states is there's legislation that is trying to be passed through and moved through, and in some states it's happened to decouple this aspect of things, where now the casinos or the racinos do not have to have a racing element to them in order to still hold their table games and their slots and all of that. It was a very interesting discussion about a lot of the stuff that was going on in Florida with their decoupling debate, and how the governor struck a deal with basically the Seminole tribe down there, but now all of a sudden a judge has turned around and said that deal may not be constitutional, which means that it may throw the whole decoupling thing into flux, because originally as part of that deal, basically what it was said was that for harness racing, quarter horse racing, highlight, a lot of those, you did not have to have that coupling going on with those casinos. Thoroughbred racing was exempted from that, at least this time around, and that really only affected Gulfstream, Gulfstream and Tampa, because those are the two main tracks that basically run now there. So it didn't really affect the thoroughbred side, but it did affect the other sides. And so they talked about Pompano Park down there and how this may be the last season for them because of that whole decoupling thing. So we just have to watch and wait and see what happens there. But the warning bells have been sounded. Legislators are looking at this, and they're looking at all of this money that's coming from casinos going to the racing industry, and they're asking questions of what is the racing industry doing with this money to improve their product. I think, for some felt the intent of the initial coupling, coupling legislation and coupling rules was to allow the racetracks to garner more money to improve their product to where they might be able to stand on their own. That really hasn't happened. There's been, and they did talk about how a lot of tracks have made major infrastructure improvements and things like that, which is a great thing to see, but still not seeing the being able to stand on your own part. And I went up and I asked a question of the representatives that were there. Do they really think that decoupling, if it happens, if some of these smaller tier tracks will actually be able to survive? Would they be able to survive on their own? And, one of them responded, probably not for a lot of them. And even some of the major tracks may not be able to survive without the coupling aspect there. So it's going to be very interesting to follow. I did also ask if they felt that what went on in Pennsylvania might be a way for other states to go to protect their money that's coming from the casinos. What Pennsylvania did basically was, instead of having the money go directly into a fund for them, it kind of went into a trust fund, per se, that then is distributed out to be used for purses and other aspects of the industry. The theory there being then that the state government cannot step in and try to grab that money to put it in other places in their general budget. That's not been challenged legally yet, so we have no idea what's going to happen there, but that certainly is a possibility maybe for other states to follow. When we look at this whole decoupling thing. And decoupling is going to happen in one form or another. Florida has almost basically done it. Pennsylvania has been trying to do it. It just really hasn't gained any traction in the legislature yet. New York just introduced a bill to try to have it done. It's going to happen somewhere, and it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when it does, because that's a huge amount of money that the racing industry will no longer have coming to it. And the question is, will those tracks be able to survive? Because obviously purses are going to drop significantly. When you look at some of these places that have this coupling in effect, 85, even 90% of their purse structure is from this money coming from the casinos. And it's not coming from pari-mutuel handle. So that would be a huge purse hit for the horsemen. So we just don't know exactly what's potentially going to happen with this. Again, it's something to watch. It's something to be aware of. There was a lot of talk about it, but no real concrete answers on how to deal with it. It was just more of an information kind of session. So that's what they really talked about with the decoupling debate. The final talk that we kind of looked at, I take that back. No, there was one talk before that. The other big talk was about field size and ways to increase field size, because obviously if field size increases in racing, handle usually increases because it gives the better a better product to bet on. So they had a lot of really good racing secretaries up there from a lot of the big circuits for this talk, and they all talked about how in some circuits it's not a problem because the horse population is so robust and the meet is so popular that they really don't have to worry about field size. The field size is there and they don't have to worry about it too much, whereas other tracks, it's a daily struggle to get enough horses to fill races. And of course, there's a lot of issues at play with that. One of the things that was brought up, obviously, is as we look more at horse health and equine welfare, some of these horses may just not be allowed to race as frequently as they had been in the past, which cuts down on numbers. The foal crop, so the number of foals born each year, is constantly decreasing, yet all of these tracks seem to still want to run the same number of race dates with the same number of races. Well, the math just obviously just doesn't work out on that, so something's got to give somewhere, and so you get a lot of times these 4 or 5 horse field sizes, because that's all the number of horses these racing secretaries can get to go in certain races. One thing that was brought up as a potential solution to look at, and it's been met with a lot of resistance in some areas, but it looks like it probably will happen to some degree, is knocking out the number of choices that are available in the condition book or race choices for a trainer or an owner. Now, of course, a trainer wants to be able to, find the exact perfect spot for their horse that gives them the best chance to win. I mean, that's what they're paid to do, and that's what they're always looking to do. But sometimes, when you do that, then that horse, instead of running 3 or 4 times in a meet, may run once or maybe twice because they're waiting for that perfect race to come up. So they talked about taking away certain conditions in racing that makes it so that these horsemen, if they want to run their horse, they've only got a few selection of choices as compared to maybe 10 selection of choices to run in. This obviously is something that would have to be phased in very slowly because horsemen, of course, they are looking for that, and they're not going to just openly embrace a thing where they may be taking away conditions that fit their horse better. But it's probably something that is going to have to happen if you want to keep field size up and just lessen the number of chances. I remember when I was at the EquestriCon conference in 2018, I believe it was Mark Cassey in a trainers panel that brought this up, that he says he starts roughly 1,000 horses a year, somewhere in there. He says, but in order to start those 1,000 horses, he has to enter 5,000 times in races because a lot of those races don't go, and because there's so many obscure conditions out there that trainers look for that maybe only 1 or 2 horses enter those races because that's what they're looking for. So definitely looking at the condition book and adjusting it, maybe making it where there are less choices is certainly one way to go. A lot of the racing secretaries talked about the problem of getting dirt races to go. A lot of owners and trainers seem to really want to focus on turf racing now, and that takes a toll on the turf tracks. Anybody who watches Gulfstream Park after a while knows that turf course is really beat up after a while. So one solution that's been looked at and has obviously been implemented at Gulfstream and is being looked at and implemented in a couple of other tracks is adding a synthetic surface. So by adding a synthetic surface, which they believe, turf horses tend to adapt better to a synthetic surface than running on dirt, will take some pressure off the turf course and allow them to card fuller races for both the turf and the Tapeta track, which they have down at Gulfstream. And so far the numbers have been really positive in that, as far as handle numbers and field size and all of that creeping up since they've added the Tapeta surface, which is really good. Again, you might have to look at condition issues with the dirt track, just to slim down those conditions so that you get more horses running per race. They all seem to be in agreement that obviously having that synthetic track there is nice, because then if you have races that are rained off the turf, or even if you have a really sloppy track from a lot of rain that's unsafe to race on, usually you can still race on the all-weather tracks. And that would just keep field size, reduce scratches, all of those things. So those were some of the ideas that were kind of tossed around. Obviously, it's a problem, and obviously you may be looking at a decreased number of race dates in the future for certain tracks in order to maintain their field sizes up at a bettable number. One person did come up and ask an interesting question and did kind of bring up a very valid point, which is, if you talk to the horsemen and the owners, they don't want necessarily larger field sizes because that ensures that they're going to get a bigger piece of the purse even if they finish last in a 4-horse field as compared to a 10-horse field. Whereas the bettors obviously want the bigger number of horses per race, because that increases betting opportunity and increases for big scores. So you have that little bit of that dichotomy there, and the panelists did acknowledge that, but they also said there probably are some trainers and owners that want the bigger fields because it's a little bit more of a truer run race sometimes that way too. If they have a horse that comes from off the pace, let's say, and you have a 4-horse field where one horse is just going to go out and set a really easy pace and just give that trainer's horse no chance to close into, versus a 10-horse field where there's going to be some pace and it's really going to help your horse run their style of race. So that was an interesting counterpoint to that. So we'll just again have to see where all of that goes. So that was kind of the gist of what was discussed in the field size talk. Some answers were suggested, but nothing was really concrete. One positive that did come out of it was the day before the conference started, they actually did have for the first time kind of a meetup of all of as many racing secretaries and racing executives as could make it to Tucson for that meeting. And it was a good number that met. It was a closed session to the public, so I don't know what happened in it. The media wasn't allowed to attend. But apparently there were some ideas that were exchanged among different racing secretaries, maybe setting up certain systems as well that could increase field size. One of the ideas that came out of that that smaller conference was if you have states that are kind of next to each other, making state-bred horses from those states all eligible for state-bred races in each of those states. So basically, let's say if you had New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania all next to each other, just as an example, if you were running a New York bred race, PA breds and New Jersey breds would also be eligible to run in those races, and vice versa throughout those 3 states. That's a very interesting concept and may work, and it would fit with other areas of the country too, to get those field sizes up, and takes away a restriction of horses being able to run in certain races. So that was one thing that came of it. Hopefully they're going to hold more of those smaller conferences. Apparently everybody thought it was a really good get-together and a good exchange of ideas. But we'll just have to see if that kind of continues as well. So the final talk that they had on day 2, and I guess for the symposium itself, was a little bit about sponsorship. And this really didn't deal so much with specific racing entities or anything. They had somebody there from both the University of Arizona, their sports kind of marketing department, as well as from somebody from Phoenix that deals more with the pro sports teams. And it was interesting to see kind of some of the ideas they had, but the real takeaway from what I seem to get out of it anyway is that instead of kind of selling signage that you see at the track, a sponsor pays so much for a race or so much for something and they get their advertising signage throughout the track. Run happy people know this all too well. It's selling the experiences. So instead of maybe getting signs put all over the place, you are able to provide certain experiences for that sponsor that they can then bring in, business people from their groups. They talked a lot about making deals at these events and things like that for these businesses. John Deere was talked about. And bringing over and getting people to sign contracts with John Deere, and all because John Deere had a sponsorship at the tracks where they were able to provide some of these people with amazing experiences at the track that you wouldn't normally be able to get. So they also talked about experiences that are available in certain luxury areas of stadiums and things like that from your sponsorship dollars. So that seemed to be kind of the area that it was going. It'll be interesting to see if racing adapts and kind of takes that over. You do see like these experience packages per se pop up on big days now, where like for paying a certain amount of money, you get exposure to the paddock, to the winner's circle, to different things that the normal person just paying general admission wouldn't get. Obviously, if you're doing it as a sponsorship, you probably would get a lot more. So that was kind of the gist of their talk. And that was really much it. After that, the symposium wrapped up. Like I said, I thought it was a really interesting experience. For me, this was my first time being out there. In the future, it would be nice maybe to see some more panels put together of fans and handicappers. You have a lot of the big industry executives there, and racetrack operators and all of this. It would be nice to have maybe a panel of fans and handicappers to be able to get up there and say, hey, this is what we think we want. And, or maybe you have a combination panel of some racing execs and some handicappers, fans, so they can talk about ideas and why certain things would work and so why certain things wouldn't work. It's all about, education going both ways in that type of collaboration. So maybe we'll see that in future panels. Again, the new director of the Racetrack Industry Program was very open to feedback, so we certainly will be providing some as far as what we think are great future topics. If you have any suggestions for potential future topics that might work at the Racetrack Industry Program, certainly drop them a line in the comments, and we at Thoroughfan will pass them along. But that's really kind of sums up everything that happened at the 47th Annual Global Symposium on Racing. So if you were there, I hope you got as much out of it as I did. If you weren't, hopefully you were able to see maybe the online streaming, which they did the first time this year, which I thought was really nice for people that couldn't attend in person. And hopefully I'll be looking to attend again next year in person as well for a conference. Who knows? Maybe Thoroughfan will be able to have a representative get up there and talk about what the fan wants in racing as we move forward. So that, as I said, kind of sums everything up. Hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. We, of course, at Thoroughfan, will be following everything that's going on in racing throughout and updating things as need be, but I will probably be off until after the new year when we'll have another segment pop up of, who knows, could be a race name, could be something going on that's recent, could be talking about a certain medical term, anything and anything we kind of cover here on Thoroughfan, because that's really what it's about, is giving you, the racing fan, the most accurate and up-to-date information as possible when it comes to this wonderful world of thoroughbred racing. So I am Doc for Thoroughfan, and always remember, if you, the racing fan, are looking for the best information out there that is put out solely by us, the racing fans, there's only one place for you to turn, and that's right here at Thoroughfan.